Well, there's a couple things that fascinate me about face vessels. One is certainly the objects themselves. I've studied alkaline glaze stoneware, and specifically stoneware utilitarian pottery that was made in the Edgefield district in the 19th century. And itself, just as an object, they're beautiful objects. The forms, the glazes, I think are wonderful, underappreciated, just artistic works of ceramic art. Then you apply this whole different level with applied features. And from an artistic standpoint, I think exaggerated features, eyes and mouth and nose, and then the use of kaolin clay that really highlights, those features. I think they're obviously very special objects for just what they are. And then the second thing is once you get beyond the objects themselves and the uniqueness of them and the intrinsic artistic value that they have, then there's this whole other level of who made them, when were they made, what were they used for, and that whole level that adds another level of complexity to these objects and really a deeper meaning to the objects. I think there's been a lot of studying done of face vessels, what their uses may have been, where they were made, and who made them. And I go back to some of the earlier researchers, Robert Ferris Thompson, who early on recognized these as very important objects. And he sort of cautioned that that we really can't look at monofunctionality of these objects, because that really wasn't monofunctionality. Really was something that the people that likely made them, Africans or African Americans or descendants, they used objects, especially important objects, for different functions. I think that's one thing that I've always struggled with, where there are individuals that want to say that they were used for this purpose or that purpose, and I tend to agree with all of them. I think, you're all absolutely right that these objects were important objects. They had importance in the community in which they were made, and therefore, some may have used them as devices or objects near the front door for protection. Others may have used those for significance for a burial in a graveyard, and they had multiple functions. So I think one of the problems that we faced in the past is trying to find the magic bullet and say, here was the use, here's why these were made. And I think we need to look at these as multifunctional, very important objects, and there may be many different answers for their, why they were made. In studying these objects and doing research on them, had the opportunity to see a number of them, and one was offered to me by a friend and fellow collector and researcher for sale. And it was one that really it kind of came to light from an obscure location in New York State, and first time I had seen it. And the first time it was shown to me, I picked it up, held it in both hands, and knew it was potentially for sale. Went to put it back down, and I really couldn't. I just couldn't let go of it. Just held it in my hands, kept looking at it, and just kind of had to laugh and said, well, I'm not much of a poker player. I think I really like this object, and I would really like to own it. And but it was that powerful to me that I just almost couldn't, when I first held it in my hands, couldn't set it down. These objects, and generally Southern stoneware, I feel has been way underappreciated by major museums. I think we've had some exhibitions that were really breakthroughs. The fact that we had a major exhibition on these 19th century Edgefield District face vessels that was curated by Chip Stone, started at Milwaukee Art Museum, in the fact that we also got interest from the Columbia Museum of Art to display these objects. And I think in both of those cases, you see the name art in the museum. So they really weren't history museums. They were museums that have a focus on the aesthetics of the object and in viewing these objects as great American ceramic art. So I think that's amazing that there's this breakthrough, that people have this appreciation for not only face vessels, but all Southern alkaline glazed stoneware. There was interest by the Boston Museum of Fine Art, again, the term art, to display some of these objects. And at that time, they didn't have Southern stoneware to speak of in their collection. And they asked if I would loan a piece for exhibition, which I was glad to do. And the object was displayed in a vitrine and kind of a walkway at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, in the great new American wing at the Boston MFA. Well, I happened to be up, in Boston on business, so I went to visit my friend. And so, I looked at it, was very happy the way it was displayed. I had worked on that with the museum staff on the label, so I was very happy how the label ended up. I thought it was accurate. And I kind of stood back to view the object and sort of take it in from a big picture. And one thing I noticed, and the MFA is full of great art. You're almost overwhelmed with, these great objects, sort of attacking you from all sides. But I noticed people would walk by this vitrine, and it was almost unique. They would stop in their tracks. And I don't know if it was the object, they looked at an object and this was something that was looking back at them and they made a connection. But more times than not, people walking through the gallery would stop at this object and go up to it and study it and then read the label and study it more and then walk on. So I don't know what was capturing their attention, whether it was something they have never seen before or the fact that they were looking at an object and with its bright white kaolin eyes was staring back at them. But these objects do have the ability to capture people's attention and draw them in. In this case, they would examine the object closer and then take the time to read the label and learn more about these objects, which I thought was pretty amazing that this major art museum would have this type of ceramic object made in the Edgefield district in the 19th century and have it capture so many people's attention. In understanding these face vessels, the earliest documentation of their existence was in a major scholar on American ceramics, Edwin Atlee Barber, who was associated with the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And he interviewed Colonel Thomas Davies, who had a brickwork in Bath, South Carolina, and later a pottery. And Davies related to Barber that in 1862, that Negro workers, he didn't call them slaves, but we assume from the records they were enslaved workers. The Negro workers, in their spare time, would make these coarse jugs with face decorations. It was notable that Barber included that in the update of his book. And he really said that I think this was a breakthrough for him because he had seen these objects in collections described as African ceramics. So I think it was a big aha moment when Colonel Davie says, no, in fact, these were made in America, in South Carolina, by Negro workers. So I think that was an important breakthrough, and very early on. This was in the early 1900s when this was documented. I think it's quite interesting that the latest scholarship, and there has been some recent scholarship and study and interest in these 19th century face vessels, indicate, based on archaeology and also examination of the base forms themselves, that there's an indication that these vessels may have been made at a number of different potteries. There's evidence that they're made obviously at the Colonel Davie's pottery in the 1860s, but there's some evidence also that they may have been made at Lewis Miles Stony Bluff pottery, Reverend John Landrum pottery on Horse Creek, and then there's a set of these face vessels which I think are really different than what most people refer to as Edgefield face vessels, but they're different in form and also overall appearance, and it appears those are attributed to a well-known potter in the Edgefield area, Thomas Chandler, and those would have been made possibly in the late 1840s, early 1850. But a very different feel for some of these other face vessels. But the recent scholarship and the archaeological work indicates that they may have been made at multiple potteries. And then an examination of the intact vessels, it really appears that there were certainly more than one hand in making these objects, and may have been as many as a half a dozen or a dozen potters or individuals putting on the features of pots turned by others. So the practice of making these vessels really appears to be widespread. So obviously their use was pretty broad if a number of people were making them, different people, over a span of a number of years. And I think that's quite interesting. But the work continues as the archaeological investigations at some of these pottery sites continue. We will continue to learn more. Something that I think is really intriguing is there's over 100 of these 19th century attributed to Edgefield District alkaline glazed stoneware face vessels that are known, but they continue to show up. I think it's quite interesting where these objects are showing up, and it tends to be the Northeast. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York State, New England. And there's a lot of theories on why these objects are showing up there. One theory, and again, I don't think there's one right answer, and I've heard a number of theories. I think a theory is that these were important objects to black families, and during the Great Migration, these would have been important objects that they would have taken with them, and then through generations, they lost their significance, and they just kind of end up, for sale here and there. So that's one theory. The other theory is this area, there were a lot of Northerners that wintered around the Aiken area. And maybe they were oddities that showed up here that Northerners would take back, and again, they would change hands with time. There's even theories that if they were used on grave sites, that they may have been picked up as unique objects and removed from graves, and then later sold, as important objects. There is a lot of interest in not only the Southern stoneware and ceramic collecting circles, but these objects are also being viewed as great American folk art and great African American folk art. And so their value and desirability on a number of fronts is increasing all the time as we know more about them and others become educated about the importance of these objects. A photographer in Aiken, Palmer, did have a photograph, rather two photographs of two Edgefield face vessels, one with an African-American boy, the other with an African-American girl. That form is quite unusual. It has a cross-the-top strap handle, sometimes referred to as a harvest jug, and there are similar examples. I don't think exactly that face vessel has been found. There are similar examples that are known, but I don't really think that specific object has been found or has yet to come to light.